there are powerful, transformatory experiences. I would call them emergent experiences because I think they're new, they're emerging now, that a lot of people haven't had them, and when you have them, they make a big, like, happen for you. And there's a kind of mythos, really, around a lot of spirituality, that the interpretation of those experiences is given in the experience. Yes. So the idea is, you've had the experience, you now know. And you can say what you know, and you know that from the experience. And I bought into that in lots of ways for decades. And I do not think it's right at all now. I think we have these experiences, and there's lots of ways, potentially, of understanding what they are, which reveal the significance of the experience, or actually can mislead you and take you down a different route. Hi, and welcome to what I hope is going to be a series of conversations exploring the philosophy I've been working on, which I call unividualism. And I call it that because it's a philosophy designed to support the evolution of what I call unividuals, which are individuals conscious of unity. And we're in my kitchen in my home in Glastonbury in the UK. And I'm with Jessica NATHANSON, who's flown in from Israel to attend a retreat, which finished yesterday. And this first conversation was one I wanted to have about non-duality. And Jessica's working on a book on non-duality. So it felt too good an opportunity to miss, to explore what's the relationship between this very popular non-dual approach to spiritual awakening and this other approach, which is what I would call uni-dual, which underlies unividualism. So welcome. It's lovely to be in my kitchen with you.
Amazing to be in your beautiful kitchen.
I thought a really good place to start would be your experience, personal experience of non-duality, how you got into it, how you found it, and where you've ended up with it.
Sounds good. Yeah, so I sort of stumbled into it, I would say. Stumbled and then sort of fell headlong into it. But about 10 years ago, I had a pretty massive awakening experience beyond the self, or beyond the ego, and sort of the sense of being Jessica or being somebody. It all just kind of dissipated and left me in sort of radically new world where I no longer really existed, and that kind of turned everything inside out and upside down, and it was, extreme liberation and transcendence, and really felt like this is the solution to all of my problems. And so I guess after that, I was really just trying to understand it and looking for.
So it's two things that how long did that last? Was it like a bang thing and then stopped, or did it extend?
I would say it was sort of that big bang, and then a lot of little bangs and big sort of ups and downs, like the roller coaster kind of thing. But from that one huge bang, everything changed. There's a very clear sense of a before and then an after.
I understand completely.
So yeah, I guess that's how I would describe it.
So before that, were you reading non-dual books? Had you come across it and then it happened, or did it just happen and then you go looking for all that stuff?
Yeah, and I've also been trying to kind of piece all of that together. Sort of how did it happen?
Right.
But I was reading some of the more sort of, let's say, bestseller, sort of new age blending, sort of Eastern with self-help kind of ideas. So Eckhart Tolle, The Power of Now, The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And these were really kind of planting the seeds for this path of self-transcendence, that sort of offering this way out from our personal problems and our suffering. And so the word non-dual was sort of starting to surface here and there, but I really didn't know what it was. It sounded very mysterious and very cryptic.
Okay, so that's the door. You've got experience, and this thing which you're finding seems to address that experience.
Yes, I
and
think so.
explain it or offer more or all of that?
Both. I think it helped provide a framework,
Yeah.
and then it also provided, let's say, a sort of map to follow of how to get more of this,
Yep.
and how to go further into this sort of
Yeah.
new non-dual reality, so to speak.
So, and what was attractive about it?
What was attractive about it? Well, it was extremely enticing, this sort of idea of rising above all of your human problems, and that idea of going beyond, and this idea of, I guess, sort of an immunity from, from personal problems, from, let's say, everything from just being chronically dissatisfied to, always expecting something to hold the promise of happiness that never provides it, to, existential things like the fear of death. But really it felt kind of like an escape, a way out.
So, the word non-duality gets used in lots of different ways. There's non-dual traditions that go back hundreds and hundreds of years. There's new ones that have arisen and become very popular recently.
Yeah.
It means different things. What was the key understanding that you found that people were offering you? What was the?
Well, I would say in the catchphrase is no self, no suffering. Essentially, if you can get rid of the self, the one who cares, the one who has problems, then that's the ticket, of course. If there's no one there to really be hurt, then there's no hurt. So it was really that. It was beyond that. It was really about negating things. So it was really what you're not. You are not an ego. You are not separate. There are no boundaries. So it was very much no separation, no ego. Eventually the world is sort of this illusion. So it was very much building up this sort of belief system around what's ultimately real and what's not. Mm-hmm. And once you can see through all of these things that are not real, you arrive at the ultimate truth, which is this liberation. And once you get there and live in light of that truth, then you're free.
That's pretty similar to what I came across, I think, in a slightly different way. Mine was about 30 years ago, I guess, and was through the writings of Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj and that which really made a big impact on me, and then meeting by a magical sense of coincidences, as often happens, Ramesh Balsekar in his living room with 6 other people in Mumbai, and just going, wow, this is amazing. Here's this elderly, white-haired gentleman in a rocking chair saying these amazing things which related to experiences I'd had, right, which were similar and were having, and then opened up a whole new experience of it. And that was really, really, really interesting. But I know that, like me, your journey didn't end there. And right. What happened?
Well, I would say I went pretty deep into the kind of new age, non-dual circuit, if you will. And that sort of initial intention of, finding peace and transcendence, and there's so much wisdom and so much to be gained from that, really turned into something a bit darker and more cynical and nihilistic, which really ended up becoming sort of, you are not a person, you don't exist, I don't exist. These words are being spoken by nobody. It really became this message of kind of, you are the problem, and what we're doing together in these, let's say, non-dual sort of meetups and conversations is really about helping each other to, really all I can say at this point was to invalidate one another's stories and existence. So, it sounds very extreme. That's because it was. Yeah. It was radically extreme. And that's kind of, I think, what a lot of us were seeking. Extreme suffering looks for an extreme solution to that. But so just to kind of fast forward a bit, I eventually found myself, let's say about 5 years after this initial awakening and this honeymoon period with, this beyond the self experience, I realized that my sense of self had been so eroded to the point that, what was once a very vibrant personality, which I hope has been coming out over this weekend, just really kind of disappeared, and I lost access to it, and I found myself in these experiences where even just having a conversation like this felt difficult to carry it on. Everything's just this story. None of it really matters because it's not really real. And finding that, I really just lost my character.
You lost yourself.
I lost myself, and I succeeded, right?
Yeah.
I succeeded in one way. I did exactly what I was supposed to do, then realized, wait a minute, the price for this is just too high. I couldn't really function.
How bad did that get?
It got to the point of extreme dissociation, and I would say more of a clinical type of depersonalization. Which some call enlightenment's evil twin. And I think it was really when there was a specific relationship that I tried to enter into and realized this extreme anxiety of, oh my God, I don't think that I can uphold this sense of personhood consistently enough to hold up my end of the relationship. And that was a huge wake-up call that, holy shit, something's gone wrong here, and I need to look under the hood. But it kind of spiraled out at one point into what people now call a spiritual emergency. And that's kind of led me to this passion to have conversations like this, to really say, okay, what went wrong there? What were the pitfalls? What can people do differently? How can we avoid that and kind of take the best of those sort of new age, modern, non-dual ideas and leave behind what's most harmful?
Yeah, because my sense, I have all sorts of people come along to my retreats, and well, the one that we were at was just like such a cross-section, isn't it?
It is.
But one of the stories that leads people is this one, is that kind of people looking to escape non-duality because they've found something which was initially very attractive. Not just that, also have people who are trying to escape Christianity. It's like there's all sorts of things that you can get stuck in, and that non-duality is another one like that. So all of those ideas that we've mentioned, it'd be nice to pick over all of them really, and just look at what's right about them, but maybe what's wrong about them. But before we do that, I'm just that's very extreme, what you experienced, and how did you get out of that?
It's a great question. Well, part of that, one of the things that I'm working on with a friend is sort of this recovery path from Neo-Advaita, which I think will come up, which is sort of this modernized sort of cherry-picked version of sort of ancient Advaita. We can get to that later.
Yeah.
But I, first of all, just to deal with the sort of acute, extreme sort of symptoms of dissociation, had to go through a lot of grounding, a lot of, kind of removing myself from, I had to stop working for a little while. I actually moved to Israel at that time. It was a very destabilizing period, but I think the biggest thing that helped me was discovering how many other people out there were having the same experience, because I thought I was going insane. In some ways I was, but I'm not the only one by any means. There are thousands of people, I think, that are coming out of the woodwork now around the world that are saying, hey, wait a minute, it's been about a few years now, and what was really amazing has now turned into sort of this nightmare. So finding all of these other people to connect with, to validate that experience. But I would say a really big part of it ended up being the philosophical deconstruction, which is what has led me to you, really, to finding another way to engage with non-duality, but to really revision it.
So, I didn't have that experience that you've had. I'm lucky.
Luckily.
For me, I was much older than when it happened, and I had been through an awful lot already, and gone down all sorts of dead ends. But I was very impressed by the whole non-dual Advaitic tradition, and it did lead to an experience. But what happened very shortly, a few years afterwards, was I had a daughter. And holding this little baby in my arms, the idea that there was no individuality and no self, and life was a meaningless illusion that I should recover from, was like, no, that's not right. And that moment brought into focus something which has always been there, really, I think, which was, how does our individuality and the experience that everything is one, how does that sit together? And the non-dual one, as it seems to be in the title, is one approach to that, isn't it? It's one.
It is. And it's completely incompatible. You can't have an individual which relies upon some degree of separation if there's only oneness and separation isn't real. I love how you said when you had a baby. I think a lot of people have that experience. Like me, everything was actually okay when I was by myself. I learned how to be exquisitely peaceful on my own and to love solitude. I didn't need anyone anymore or anything. But then I lost the ability to have relationships. So it was in the relational sphere that shit started to hit the fan.
Yeah.
Where I wasn't able to really engage in that way anymore.
Yeah, if I look back to my time with Ramesh, who I am genuinely grateful to, because I did he helped me understand, not just intellectually, but I got a new experience. His whole thing was no doer. We can talk about that maybe later, which is, and I got that and as an experience, which was interesting. And it was magical, you know. I mean, this is crazy stuff that happens around these experiences. And sometimes, because the magic in life turns up around what I would call emergent or more new experience, it can seem like it's endorsing it. Yeah. You know, the little thing that happened for me, I think it's in one of my books, was I just literally finished my first ever book, which was a version of Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching. And here was Ramesh, who was clearly very influenced by the Taoist tradition, like a little Lao Tzu. And I come out from there with the person I was with, and I say the words, very excited. I feel like I've just been with a living Lao Tzu. So I'm really excited. And we go into town, and when you're a first-time author, you will have this when your book's done. You know, it's like, it's a big deal to see your book in a shop. You know, or someone reading it on the train.
I'm not sure I'm going to get to that point.
Yeah. But it is a big deal. And I'd never, ever seen it in a shop.
Oh my gosh.
Not, you know, it hadn't been out for very long, but I'd never seen it in a shop.
Yeah.
And I'm walking in Mumbai, and it's really, really hot. And I'm thinking, wow, I just got to get... And I can feel air conditioning coming from this big, big doorway, which is a shop, which is this massive bookshop. And I just walk through, and there, right in front of me, is my Tao Te Ching, like staring at me, and it's like, oh my God, everything's just happening. He's right. It's the flow of the non-dual, and so like all of that plays into it. So I am grateful to him, but I feel looking back, especially for me, because the biggest thing which marks out the awakening. There's lots of awakening states, lots of them, but the ones that really grab me, it's not the oneness. It's the love, the connection.
Exactly.
And I do remember that there was a young woman there who, there was two of them actually, on a couple of days that I went. One was a very young woman who just, I forget her name, Lucy or something, and she just stood at the back and just went, there was only a handful of us, and just went, what about little Lucy?
Oh.
And it was so like, you know, and it was like,
yeah.
And then the other lady, the next day or whenever it was, she brought her husband's ashes to put into the Ganges. Wow. And she was asking, and Ramesh was so like, no, none of that is of any significance. And she said, but what about love? And he said, love is the opposite of hate. And that was all he said. And it's like, it was interesting when I look back that my bullshit detector wasn't just going boo, boo, boo. I obviously was, because I remember it.
Yeah.
I don't remember much else, but I remember that. So I knew that something wasn't right.
Exactly.
And in that phrase is the kind of thing which in his version I don't think was right. And that's to do with relationship.
Exactly, yeah. And love, I think that's one of the main things when I look back. It's so funny, I look back at these teachings and these words that once held such a feeling of even warmth and comfort and freedom. To me, they're chilling.
Yeah.
Because there's such a lack of love. And if there is love, it's always talked about as sort of this detached, impersonal love. But it's never really love in action. There's no love for the self.
Yeah.
There's no love of relationship. It's just about negating all of those things. So.
All right, let's get into some ideas then. Because so what's happened for me is the further I've got away from, the more I've developed different ways of thinking. Sometimes I don't even know it doesn't make any sense to me. Non-dual. It's like, what? And the thing that really strikes me, maybe this is a good place to start, I don't know, is that there are powerful transformatory experiences. I would call them emergent experiences because I think they're new, they're emerging now, that a lot of people haven't had them, and when you have them, they make a big, like, happen for you. And there's a kind of mythos, really, around a lot of spirituality, that the interpretation of those experiences is given in the experience. Yes. So the idea is, you've had the experience, you now know. And you can say what you know, and you know that from the experience. And I bought into that in lots of ways for decades. And I do not think it's right at all now. I think we have these experiences, and there's lots of ways, potentially, of understanding what they are, which reveal the significance of the experience, or actually can mislead you and take you down a different route. And my interpretation now, if you were coming along to me, and sharing your story, would be, I think the initial understanding, the experience is valid, it's important, no wonder you took it so seriously, how amazing. Maybe there's a different way of understanding it.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly the conclusion that I've come to, is that there's the experience, and then there's the philosophical lens that you see the experience through that gives meaning to it and informs it. And I think that the sort of either or Neo-Advaita non-duality was really sort of a non-philosophy that claimed to not be a philosophy, that it was based on this direct experience that's beyond words. So they would laugh about, or we would laugh about how, oh, we're talking about this, but really it's, it's not about the words, it's not a story, but it was a story. It was a story about how there's no story. And it was a system of beliefs. And I think that that's really the biggest thing that I want to help people with, is to understand that you've had these experiences that are pre or non-conceptual, but what you've gotten involved with is a very specific ideology based on that's not given, right? Like you said, this is one way of looking at it that can be looked at in many ways, and we have a choice of how.
Yeah, I mean, I would even push that further, Jessica. I would now say all experience is conceptual. Because anything which you're experiencing consciously or unconsciously, in fact, relies on some form of discrimination to enable you to know what it is at all. And we have this idea that somehow it's the conscious thinking which does that. It's not. It's a whole complex system. One of the things recently, especially over the last few years, where it's felt, looking back at Advaitic and lots of older mystical, particularly Indian perhaps, philosophy, but also true of the Chinese philosophies and the Western ones, it's just old. And they have a naive psychology. Yeah. It's just it had no knowledge of the subconscious mind. Exactly. That hadn't arrived for another quite a few thousand more years. That's right. And they didn't understand. We are just later. We're not smarter or anything. We're just later. So we have this body of knowledge they lacked. We understand the things that science has shown us, as well as the things that spirituality has shown us. So it's just a kind of a naive idea that there are some things that are given. So we have the idea. Well, I think it happens with the thing which you get from, like, the be here now thing, which is a great piece of advice. Pay attention to where you are and be mindful. Be present. How lovely. Who could not enjoy that? But the idea that somehow there's an unfiltered experience, and then there's the mind which is filtering it, rather than, look, even my ability to hold this and to know how hot it is and whether it's too hot, all of that's conceptual. It's me being able to understand a sensory perception, to know, if I throw something from one hand to the other, all I get with my senses is where it is right then, whatever the object is. But what I'm doing is processing it in such a complex way, with its weight and with the velocity, that I'm going to go caught it, hopefully, or not. But, like that, and that's a massive amount of processing that's happening unconsciously all the time. Right. You're not leaving that processing or the mind behind. You can't. What you can do is try and develop better processing. Sure. Which means that then when you have these transcendent, when I say transcendent, that these states, these non-normal states, what I call deep awake states, It's like you're awake, but in a really deep way. It's like, oh, this is new. This is amazing. Then that's where it's like to understand those is going to be more tricky because they're not happening all the time. You haven't had them before. And the natural thing to do, I did it and it happened to me when I was very young, but by my teenage years, I was looking around, what are these experiences I'm having? Who's had them? Mainly for me, it was dead people, but I could read their books, but then there were some living people as well, and I could get out as I got older and I could go and see them. And it was like all these different people's explanation.
Exactly.
Although most of them had a certain, I do think there is a kind of a underlying spiritual approach to things which developed at a certain point in the evolution of culture, which is still dominant, which is still there in a way that, say, our understanding of physics isn't. It's moved on beyond belief from Aristotle, say. But spirituality is still embedded in thought around the same time or before Aristotle. So that our psychology is like this old psychology.
Yeah.
So when these states happen, we need to relook at them. That's what I'm saying.
100%. In light of the developments.
Yeah.
I always think of how all of these teachings, it's like, do they know anything about, trauma? Do they know anything about the mind-body connection?
Yeah.
So many things, neuroscience, that they just didn't know. And it's, like you said, it's no fault to them.
Yeah.
It's just limited. We know more now, and so we need to revise. I think just the same way that we want to modernize, let's say, very patriarchal or misogynistic religions that need to sort of adapt to fit in with modern values. I think we need to do the very same with the Eastern traditions. Yeah,
I agree. And so I would like to, at least before we end, I would like to come to the actual experience you had, what other one I had, and the numbers we both had, I'm sure, since and before, and look at them from a different perspective, so that can draw out why they were still really important, but how you can understand them differently. But I'm thinking, on my feet here, probably that's going to be easier to do once we've explored some of the ideas, because then we can use the ideas to go, now let's look at those experiences.
Exactly. And I think it's good to really kind of make it clear that we are ultimately getting at experience, an experience we've both had, and the philosophy is there to help sort of guide
understand
us
and let us find it again, go deeper. So so maybe the first, it's the self, probably. Is that a good place to start with that?
Sure.
That's the enemy.
What self?
What does that mean? Well, actually, that's good.
Right.
I am genuinely confused now. It wasn't years ago, but I am now. I think, when they say no self, what do they think the self they're denying is?
Such a good question. Because we're always using these terms, right? But we're not always referring to the same thing.
Yeah.
So what is that?
But what are they referring to? Because, when I talk to Ramesh or any of the non-dualist teachers I know and all that, they're clearly a body.
Right.
That seems to be clear. So obviously that's not up for grabs.
Well, is it clear? Because you also hear you are not your body, but we can get to that.
Yeah, okay. Well, again, no, but that's the thing. Okay, so if you're not your body, what's the you? Okay, I can get that. So then maybe you're not, there's a body, but maybe you have a body or something else. Okay, that's okay. So what's the you? Well, then you get the psychology, the psyche, the soul, the persona. You're not that. It's like, so then what are you? So you, and it seems to reduce it to the idea that you're this kind of thing witnessing it all, which is an abstract entity, which I'm not sure exists. So in they're saying that doesn't exist, I agree with them. I'm not sure there is this abstract thing that I'm a consciousness witnessing a body, and it feels like it makes much more sense to me now to go, no, I'm a organic and psychological system interacting with the world. Am I separate from the world? No, never. I'm always in relationship to the world. Always. Exactly. So, in all those ways, I agree with them. But that seems to speak of a philosophy which doesn't go, it's not non-dual, it's not going, look, there's no duality. There clearly is duality. We're having a conversation. If there wasn't a duality, there'd be no conversation.
No, of course not.
Duality is And then, just all the way down to modern physics, it's all relational.
Yeah.
The whole universe is relational. So the idea then for me is like, okay, so this isn't, maybe it's not enough to say it's all one, although it seems pretty clear that it is. The universe is a universe, but it's the one in relationship with itself as everything. And here it is, like, what's Tim? Well, Tim's the universe, but I'm not the whole universe. I'm the universe as Tim.
Right.
And there's been these incredible 14 billion years of evolution to get us from hydrogen and a bit of helium to you and me having this conversation about the universe.
Unbelievable.
And that's all relational.
Right.
But it's also all one.
Right.
So the one is arising as Jessica and Tim going, oh, what do you make of the universe?
Yeah.
And of course we are the universe. What the hell else could we be?
Right.
We're in it. We're embedded in it. There's never a moment where Tim does not exist except in relationship with the universe.
Exactly.
So there is a mistake which people can make of thinking, I'm just this, because you're really not. You're really this in relationship. You're this which has arisen from the whole in relationship with the whole. And that's a deep flip.
It's huge.
But what it doesn't do is remove this.
Right.
It does the opposite. It goes, ooh, through the evolution of the individual, the universe has become conscious of itself. It is now in relationship with itself on this level of the body and the senses and the psyche. So the self then ceases to be the obstacle which prevents you experiencing the unity. It starts to become the foundation from which you can experience the unity.
Right. And I'm already so excited by everything you've just said, because this is the real miracle, I think. It's not that, duality is an illusion and everything is really just, this empty, formless oneness. It's that has become duality so that you and I can be here having that conversation. So, I learned this sort of, this beautiful idea of the one in relationship with itself from you. And I think that really has been sort of the redemption, if you will, to be able to have the both and. And so for me, it's all been about moving from that either or to the both and, which is a paradox in nature, that it's not just one, it's not just two, it's one and two. And it's also one as two, which is what I really sort of started to understand over the last couple of years, is that we are that. But we're also this. It's not you have to pick, either be formless oneness or be this separate, physical body or mind. It's that we're always both, and it arises as relationship. And isn't that just the most astonishing thing, that there is oneness through separateness?
Absolutely. And so that you have that uni-dual vision, it's also why I think, for me anyway, it ends up being about love. Because the love, that especially that really big love, is a very emergent level of relationship. So it feels like, look, the relationship has been increased. You've got chemical relationships, you've got biological relationships, you've got the relationship we're having now of sharing ideas of the psyche, and then you can just, and you're in relationship with the whole thing, and everything and everyone, and those are the mystical states.
Exactly.
So I'm feeling I want to introduce a little bit here about consciousness.
Sure.
We're moving very fast through ideas, but I feel like it kind of fits straight in, because I think that's the key. For me, and this has been, as you already know, but I'm going to say it anyway, which is a big shift for me from doing what everybody does. It's what else can you do? Of taking on ideas, deep ideas from beautiful people, some alive, some dead, who are doing their best to understand this incredible mystery. And one of those ideas is it's all consciousness, and that's very big in the
That was also, I should have added that to the bottom line of what the message was. Pure awareness.
Pure awareness or consciousness, one of those words. And sometimes they're differentiated, often they're not. And it's taken a long time for me to try and... I've had for ages, surely consciousness is relational. Surely consciousness is a relationship between a subject and an object. I'm conscious of you because we're subject and object. So it doesn't sound like it's very non-dual, because that must be the thing which is both subject and object. So, and we'll maybe get into that whole metaphysical thing in a minute, but the thing I wanted to try and get to straight away was the obviousness, which now seems there to me, which is that consciousness, when we're conscious of something, it's because we process it in a different way. And this is much more like it's being influenced by neuroscience but people like Carl Jung, and I think common sense. The mere fact that I go to sleep at night and I'm not conscious, and I wake up and I am conscious, it's like what this word is referring to is what you pay attention to in a very, very focused way. So I've been completely focused on you. I haven't been thinking about the toaster and the kettle and the rest of the kitchen and out the window. And I am now. And as I look out the window, now I'm conscious of it. Now I'm not.
Exactly.
And so consciousness seems like everything's in relationship. The whole evolution is of relationship. The one in relationship to itself. At a certain part in that process where you get to biological complexity, the systems are now taking in information from their informational ecology, so much information. And that information, some of it, really matters because it's a matter of life and death.
Right.
Because with biology, you've now got life and death. And a lot of it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's just the same old, same old. And what it looks like to me that is happening is that systems are prioritizing information. And that ability to prioritize some information over others will become what we experience as consciousness, which is like a beam which goes, process that in high definition, process that in high definition, and everything else is processed in lower definition, uses up less energy, less bandwidth. I'm using obviously computer analogies.
Like we always say, what you focus on is what grows in your, right? What becomes more vivid is what you place your attention on.
Exactly.
So I'm fascinated by the way that you sort of revision this. I'm still sort of wrapping my mind around it because as consciousness, not as a thing, but as a process.
Yeah,
and I know that it's compelling. It's still hard to make that shift because I've been so sort of immersed in this idea that there's a consciousness, or that you are consciousness itself.
Yes.
But you're saying that's not really.
I actually think it's now there is no such thing as consciousness.
Yeah,
itself.
And that's where I'm like. Well.
I mean, but partly it's confusing because the word is used in opposite ways, which is really confusing. So sometimes consciousness means everything you're conscious of.
Right.
Sometimes it refers to the kind of psyche, particularly. That's consciousness. And sometimes it refers, and in Neo-Advaita, it refers specifically and often to a presence, which is this abstract thing, which is just pure
the ultimate,
consciousness.
The absolute, right?
It's just pure. It's the ground of everything. And it's the pure presence of consciousness. And all of these are appearances arising in it. We can get into that maybe in the metaphysics. But I see no evidence at all to think that that is true. I've had experiences which made me end up there, but now I think there's a much better way to interpret them.
Right.
Which we can have a play with as well. But the bit that I feel like I want to just pick up on, all these ideas interconnect, don't they? And they're like, is that once you get that, if you just, even if people listening to our conversation are very into non-duality, just as an experiment, just go, look, where you put your attention is vivid. You are conscious of it. Where you don't, it's all being processed unconsciously. So imagine that consciousness is a very, 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 very emergent level of relationship, which is, that relationship has been there right from the start. It's all uni-dual. So it's not like it came from nowhere. It's been growing the whole time. It's just at the biological level, it becomes sensation, conscious sensation, focus sensation, and then from that is going to come psyche. Also now it's imagination and thought, and most of that's unconscious, or your thoughts happening. And thank goodness, there's too many of them.
Yeah,
and then the little bit we're doing on the top here, like Carl Jung's thing, is tip of the iceberg, is that's conscious, and we move it about. As soon as you've got that, I think you can start approaching all of those spiritual awakening experiences in a different way.
Yeah.
Because what I think happens for most people, what happened for me, let me do that, is when you go deeply into a state, I think about most recent time it happened to me most dramatic in my life, about 2 years ago, where like you described, like there's just no Tim.
Yeah.
There's just light actually in this experience, just unbelievable, But at the time, it's not like, oh, there's light. There's nothing. It's just like, wow, afterwards. But during as well. But there's no definition, and there's nothing to change. So there's no sense of time, because it's just presence of this. And these are called samadhi states, and there's a whole range of them, which different people experience, and I've had a few. So that when that happens early on, and then you come out of them, it is very tempting to think, oh, well, how do I get back? What's in the way? Well, this fucker's in the way. Tim's in the way. Because he wasn't there. And if someone comes along to you and goes, you know what's in the way? You are. You know, and especially if the you is begun, whether it's done in a negative way, you've got an ego, you're grasping, you're out for yourself, you know, and who can't look at themselves and go, oh yeah.
And if you're really down on yourself, you're depressed.
You're depressed, even worse.
It's, really
it's like you're a bit broken. It's like, oh, I am like that. Actually, you're right. I've got to get rid of that. And then you start off on that whole journey. And it's like the idea is, when I can not have this sense of self, I can enter this blissful oneness.
Yeah.
Once you get this other perspective, it just flips. Because now what you're saying is, I had the experience where that beam of being conscious, for once I stopped focusing on me and I went, or whether it just happened spontaneously or whether I did it deliberately, I was able to focus on something more emergent I'd never focused on before, like the oneness of everything. And it was amazing. But I was focusing on it. I just wasn't conscious of myself. Tim was there, which is why when I came back, there he was.
This is a really important point that I've been trying to share with people more, because I think this is the huge question when you ask, but it seemed like I wasn't there anymore.
Yeah.
So what happened? And you're saying it's not that your ego died or it disappeared, you just weren't paying attention.
I'm saying even, yes, and even more than that. I mean, I'm definitely saying that.
Yeah.
And even more than that, I'm saying, your individual self had reached such a level of maturity that it could be conscious of something transcendent.
Wow, yeah.
And if you keep nurturing and maturing and evolving your individual self, that can happen more and more and more.
Yeah.
The complete opposite of annihilating it.
For sure.
Because it's the thing which will allow you to focus beyond it.
Exactly. And it's the vehicle for that,
and like with the time example is great, isn't it? You know, because you enter those states, you have a timeless experience, and then afterwards you went, wow, that timeless experience lasted for 20 minutes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, there it is.
You know, Rupert Spira said something really interesting that always stuck with me. He said, time is the distance between two events. And so if you're not thinking about two events or, you know, past and the future, then it seems as if time dissolves.
Yeah.
So it really does make a lot of sense.
Yeah, it seems as if it does, but it hasn't, because everything is a process.
Right.
Everything is a process, including waking up to these transcendent or more emergent states.
Yeah.
And then what you get then is like this really, it's then suddenly our individuality, the fact that I'm Tim and with all my quirks and all my brokenness and history and all those things, that happens to make me and you and all yours. It's a beautiful thing. It's like the universe has arisen with this exquisite individuality, meeting itself in relationship on all these levels. Biological can be pleasure, but it can be pain and suffering, and then the psyche, which also can be delight and insight, but also can be suffering. And then from that, the universe is starting to go, oh, I'm a one.
Yes, waking up to itself.
And then suddenly, and that's what I mean when I said at the beginning about the unividual. That rather than this vision of enlightenment, which arose, I think probably around 1500 years ago, and I think people were having this experience probably for the first time ever, and wanting to escape, because life is hard. You know, it's like
much harder then.
And very hard then. You know, your lifespan is short. The diseases are horrible. There's no dentists. You know, can you imagine just that? You know,
no flushing toilet.
No flushing toilet. And most of your kids will die. So, you know, it's like, what's not to get away from?
Sure.
As well as all the amazing things. But you see this with this philosophy, which is the one I think we're questioning.
Yes.
It starts. But at the time, this is breakthrough. It's like, I feel grateful to these people. This is a new experience.
Absolutely.
They're doing their best to understand it. And then gradually that will move, like the Mahayana tradition after the Theravadan tradition is a much more engaged. You get the bodhisattva idea, you get the idea of coming into this and compassion rather than escaping.
Yes.
And then I feel what we're discussing is the next level of that.
I agree.
And the thing which has triggered it is the new scientific mythos that the universe is a one. And it's an evolving one.
Right.
It's a process which starts very, very simple and gets richer and richer and richer and richer until it reaches us.
And that's emergence, right? Is that
emergence.
what you would call emergence?
Yeah, because it's the emergence of, and it's a term used a lot in science in different ways. It's not, people have different approaches to it. But the fundamental idea is, look, there once was no matter.
Right.
And then there was matter. There once was no life, and then there was life. There was once no complex multicellular systems, and then there was once no psyche, and then there was. And there was once no conscious people. There was no systems, human beings, are capable of being conscious of the oneness.
Right.
And then there is. And that feels like the leading edge, so that spiritual awakening ceases to be an escape from the illusion of samsara and maya, or whatever you call it, the devil's playground, which is all understandable. I think that we thought that. It's just like, we thought that hundreds of years ago. Let's think differently. Now, this process is it.
Right.
And these things are the leading edge. And what the hell happens when enough people start to realize, I am Tim, but I'm Tim in relationship, I am the whole as Tim in relationship to itself. And suddenly there's this connectivity and this compassion and this love.
Yes, and the benevolence we talk a lot about. And for me, that's where it kind of went from oneness to unity. And there's a huge difference between that because...
Oh, that's interesting.
I think because with oneness, you think more of one. And unity is bringing two things together into a whole. But if there, how can you have oneness without two things to unite into oneness?
Oh,
right?
That's interesting.
And so I think what we experience, together and through your philosophy and these retreats with the eye gazing and everything, we're having a unitive experience, which is the relationship between the one and itself. So that we're one and two, and joining that together into that whole, that's unity. And I think what I used to experience, and I think I tried to explain this once, was that I felt like I was having these experiences of being one with everything. But I wasn't. How could I be one with everything if I was no longer there? And you said once, you can't have oneness by getting rid of yourself, because then that's oneness with a hole in it. And I just loved that so much. So now the idea of being one with something means that I get to be me, one with you who's also you, but with that underlying sense that we are, as you said, that oneness or the universe has risen up as two in order to relate to itself. And when it sees that, when it has that self-realizing moment as we're looking at each other, that's the huge love. Yeah. And that's been sort of the second coming, or the second or third awakening. I don't know at what point it is
third
now.
Awakening, I like that. Because that's what's so amazing, I think, about the states we've been in at the retreat, is you just see all of these different people connecting, and in that connection, where the two is made one, but it's still two.
Right.
And you see the two-ness. It's like, oh, you're you, and it's different connecting with you than it is connecting with this person here who's a 78-year-old man,
right,
or this person who's a whatever. And so it's different, and yet also...
I like to see it as different expressions of the universe, or whatever you want to call it. We talk about God or the absolute, but that we are that, but we're all unique, individual, distinct expressions of that. You can't separate it from that, but you also can't reduce it.
And the other thing which comes from that, well, there's so much, isn't there? I mean, that strikes me is that I so much want to return the I want to say the nobleness or the dignity to the human experience.
I like that. Yes.
So it's like human beings really matter, and each individual life. It's not like, well, ideally you should experience the non-dual escape, or whatever, even if you don't call it an escape. Everyone should experience this, because that's what enlightenment is, and other people are just off on some weird thing which they're into and haven't got the real thing. Right. And it feels to me like that's complete nonsense, that the whole universe is evolving with all of this diversity. Yeah. And the diversity on the level of the psyche is literally everybody's story. The things they have done, the thoughts they've had, the story of that individual in relationship with the universe.
Exactly.
That's who they are on that level. And then you hear the story diminished. Oh, it's just a story. You can get stuck in a story. It can be a bad story. You need to change your story. But it's a beautiful thing. It makes you you. And the mind, it's like the thing which allows us to do this becomes a negative. You can have crazy thoughts in your mind. You can worry. But essentially, it's not a bad thing. It's a wonderful thing. All of these things then become ennobled. And what seems like the littleness of your individual life doesn't become you must try and attain what Swami Blandananda attained. That's his thing. Good for him.
Yeah.
Hurrah.
That's one type of experience.
How interesting. But you're exploring, you are the universe exploring a very different particular route. Yes. Not just in your life, in your relationships, but also in your awakening.
Exactly. And I love what I think that your teachings and I don't know if you call them teachings, but your ideas and what you bring to us, I think, is this idea of celebration. So I think with the dignity, it's also you celebrate individuality, you celebrate differences, and that's that makes all the difference. As you said, the initial sort of this either or non-duality that's negating the individual, it's just denigrates your humanity. Yeah. And you don't really realize that until you lose something like your personality and then no longer feel human. And it's like subhuman. I
feel really, it's like I'll be quite defensive around words like the ego because, I mean, look, egotism is a really ugly thing.
It's very important to make this distinction.
It's like, when you're being egotistical or you're thinking, me,
you're pig-headed.
And there's, all of us, I'm sure, have had moments, probably lots of them, where you can go, ooh, I was just a bit full of myself.
Of course.
But generally, it's used to denigrate, again, the individual. And I want to go, no, the ego is not, it's not the villain, it's the hero. But
it can be.
You need to make it the hero. You need to make your individual self the hero of your life. And part of being a hero on a classic, adventure is you're not perfect. And you will be shown that.
Exactly.
As you evolve.
Right. It's what you do with that.
It's the hero's journey, to use Joseph Campbell's phrase. It's not a piece of cake, but because that's life, and life is not a piece of cake. Life is full of suffering. Yeah. And that suffering, it's not that the answer to the suffering is not find an escape. The answer to the suffering is, can you find enough meaning to understand it in a deep enough way? And what these deep awake states do, which in my view are not only real, but the leading edge of the whole thing and really important, is they help you do that. That's right. They help you come into a different relationship with your individuality. So that you're not this little isolated thing. Right. You're deeply connected.
Right, you're more than that.
In the flow of life.
Yeah, you're not just the individual, you're not just that individual story, but you're much more than that, right?
Yeah, in fact, that's a great
analogy.
You're
a unique part of that
because you start seeing, oh, my individual story is so much part of the whole story of the universe. Yeah. And this is the flip from egotism, where you go, so how can my individual story serve the whole story?
There you go.
Because I feel this love, I feel this connection. So let me turn my story into a story of serving the whole rather than a story which is all about serving the part. Right. And that's all great, I think.
Sure. What you do on the individual level affects the collective. And we know that now. And we love talking about that, I think. The butterfly effect and the ripple effect. But that's that relationship.
Every single person is connected with probably a small number, really, of intimately, even famous people. You have so many friends. But you're surrounded by, you have a network of influence, whether it's big or small, or not influence exactly, but connection. Yeah. And who you are will become part of who they are.
That's true.
Because you are part of they are an individual in relationship to the whole. Well, if you are very close up in that relationship, you're very close up into who they are. Exactly. So as we evolve ourselves, we all comes out, and that's all the evolution of the individual. Right. And coming into the unity becomes a very emergent level of that.
It's true, and I think it's extremely empowering, and I think we'll probably get there at some point, is the implications of that are just so huge in terms of change and evolution of society. So I just...
Okay, so before we go to that,
Yeah.
I think that's I do want to go there.
Don't want to jump ahead too
Let's. You said at one point about the name non-duality.
Yes.
So maybe we should look at the
What's
idea,
in a name?
what that is, and let's do that.
Okay.
And the whole metaphysical base of this.
I think that something that's so fascinating to me now is that all of the pitfalls that I hit and that so many people hit is all in that name, in non-dual. Because it has negation built into it. It has mutual exclusivity built into it. It's saying not to. But if you understand non-duality to be both and, to be one and two, or I really like this phrase, oneness of multiplicity, then that word can't get you there, and that we can't use that word anymore. And so if I want to help people to experience the both and non-duality, the one relationship with itself, I don't really feel comfortable using the word non-dual anymore. It has almost I don't want to say a bitter taste in my mouth, but it just doesn't feel right. Because, I mean, how can you get to both and with a word that's, it has
absolutely
the binary built into it?
I completely agree.
Which I think is very fascinating in itself, but it's really brought me to see how important linguistics is in the, how words really change your experience. But that's why Uni-dual, to me, is like this golden ticket, this aha moment. When I don't know, when I first heard it from you, it was like a million light bulbs went off. That's it. That's what this is. It's uni-dual. You're affirming both. You're not needing to affirm something by negating or invalidating something else. To me, it's such a beautiful, perfect word for what I think this experience is that we want to share with more people.
And what I mean, just to state the obvious, because I'm sure there'll be lots of people who might be thinking this. It's like it's not a radical new idea. It's the basis of Taoism. You can see the same thing arising in nearly all of the mystical traditions,
right.
The whole yin-yang thing. It's like
right.
there is a oneness that appears as two. It's the root of modern informational physics, where John Wheeler and other physicists went, oh, look, hang on, the basic concept from which reality is constructed is the concept of information, and the most simple piece of information is this or that.
I also wanted to say, because I think a big part of this is paradox and embracing paradox, and I think that... I'm curious what you have to say about that. I think that maybe part of why non-dual appeals to people and why uni-dual might be harder to embrace is because it requires you to accept that the essence of reality is a paradox.
Yes, and
that's not easy.
Yeah, it's not easy, although I think as you get used to it, it's kind of obvious. So all right, let's do that.
Yeah.
So you get the idea you get in a lot of mystical traditions and Vedic non-dual Advaita and not is not two. Advaita, not two.
Right.
Non-dual.
Division.
Division. Yeah. Is this idea that we talked about earlier that it's all there's this pure consciousness at the root of everything,
right? And
that comes from older myths, really, like this is the dream of God.
There you go.
So
the dream. Yeah.
So when you got the dream of God, the dream of Brahman. It starts off, I think, as a mythos that there's God or there's a super mind, and then and it's an explanation, isn't it? Going, well, like you have dreams. Well, this is like God's dream, and that's a great way in, and I've used that, and it's sweet. And then as that's developed, I think you've then got the idea of, well, in India you get this idea of Brahman, nirguna and Brahman sanguna, which is with and without qualities. So you're starting now, and they've realised, but God must have no qualities before the dream, because otherwise where have the qualities of God come from? So, and they move it on a bit. And you have this, but then you end up with the one that I suspect we both came across, which is it's all kind of pure consciousness, whatever that would be. It's kind of a presence that knows itself. I mean, what does it know? I find it tricky.
It kind of breaks down at a certain point.
What does that... So for me, coming at now, it feels like, look, okay, if this is all evolving, which is my hypothesis, that's the elegant idea underneath uni-dualism, that idea of the one in relationship to itself is everything which has form one part of one process. In which the past has given birth to the future.
Right.
And increasing emergence and complexity and everything. What would be the simplest thing? Well, it wouldn't be consciousness. Consciousness looks like it came really late. This doesn't look like it's conscious, but you are. Plant, not really. The dog, yes.
Yeah.
But
Different levels.
Where is it coming? And it's moving, and it's evolving, and it's a level of relationship.
Exactly.
So what would you put at the beginning? And the word that I like is the old philosophical word being, and I like it because it's just going, what's the one thing that everything has in common? Well, it exists. I mean, it's so obvious, it's kind of bland, but it's deep. So everything exists. If it doesn't have that quality, well, it doesn't exist.
And you would say that's the same as maybe isness, right?
Isness,
being is the
like
isness of
the Zen thing, the isness or the being or that it is. And then everything which is, and has a different quality. And so you and I have got very complex qualities. A molecule has a lot less complex qualities, things in between. So what's evolving is all of these qualities are formed.
Right.
So what's that? Well, it's information, which informs being. And that gives you this wonderful metaphor you can take from modern physics, which captures ancient mysticism, I think, really well, which goes, okay, so there's a field of being which is being informed by information, and that's evolving onto all these levels.
Yes.
And the paradox you're talking about is that right there in physics, which, physics will look at the lowest or the most foundational form of the universe as like quantum particles. Well, they're particles, but they are actually information in a field. They're movements, they're vibrations, they're process. You see, they're not things, everything's process. So waves in a field, and you go, oh, okay, and what's a field? Well, a field is something which holds information. Okay. And you get the paradox. It's like the field and the information is the same thing. So you've got being in a process of becoming.
Right.
Which is not that far away from the Mahayana Buddhist huge revolution where they went, samsara, the forms, is nirvana, the emptiness.
And didn't Buddha say that?
No, he didn't say
that.
that. No,
It wasn't him?
It was a revolution in Buddhism.
Okay.
Which really defines the later, greater vehicle, the Mahayana school, where they went, oh, look, it's not like there's samsara, get away from it, get to there. It's going, look, they're the same thing.
Two sides of the same coin.
And here it is in a modern language, going, look, there's a field of being, which is vibrating with information, let's say, or it's informed, giving rise to everything in an evolutionary process. They're the same thing. You can't have the field of being without the information, and you can't have the becoming, the evolving information, without the field of being.
Yeah.
So they're the same thing. So then when that relational evolution reaches the point of you and I, here right now, then it becomes possible, as we've been experiencing at the retreat, to take your attention and go, can you be conscious of the field of being? Oh yeah, you can. And if you dissolve into it, if you go into meditation, it can be like a nothingness.
Yeah.
But it's not, because you're conscious of it. But it feels a bit like a nothingness, and it's deep in its resonance, and that's one of the samadhi states. But it can also be a fullness, because it's everything.
Exactly.
And it's like, wow, it's the everything is one field. And I am, as Tim, I'm not separate from it, I'm part of it.
Right.
And I'm seeing that as this, from this perspective, which I've got. And suddenly all of those states become, you see that they are really exciting possibilities, rather than escapes or ultimate truths or any of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've come to the same conclusion, and you were mentioning, that it's not nothingness, and I think you've used this sort of phrase as the primal potentiality.
Yeah.
And I really love that it's not nothing. It's almost the potential for anything and everything.
Yeah, because if this view has some value to it, what can you say about the field of being? Well, it's the potential to become everything,
right,
or anything. So, and there's something about that. Just as just a human being, let alone as a philosopher, there's something just makes sense. I'm not even sure I can justify it, but to say what is the foundation of everything? It's the potentiality for anything.
Right.
It's like, oh, and it's becoming this. Maybe in other ways it's becoming other things.
Exactly.
But the potentiality for everything, and then it's growing into more and more and more and more and more, and we are it.
Exactly.
And then every moment is realizing a new potentiality, every single one, including coming into these non-dual states.
There it is.
So what's the implications then?
Ooh, so many implications. Well, I would say the implications start on the individual level and then kind of ripples out to the collective. And I would say I kind of want to start with the narrative. So I think that the potentiality for anything, and for, let's say, conscious creation, or you said lucid living, or Jeff Carrera says being an artist of possibility, that I was taught I needed to get rid of narrative, right? That we need to, go beyond the story. It's not real. But I think that the real gold of dissolving narrative, or seeing that narrative is, if you want to say it's an illusion, that's fine. Like you said, okay, fine. There's no, solid self. Great, that's true. So what? So if you can dissolve narrative or see through narrative, you can then see that narrative is not fixed. And once it's not fixed, then you can see that it's malleable. You can construct it. You can reconstruct it. So it's not in getting rid of the narrative or the story. It's in creating better stories, which is not what I would have wanted to hear 10 years ago. I would have laughed and said, oh, what an egoic, samsaric, story-based individual, whatever. But I think that that's what I've realized is that the potential comes when you can harness the power of choice and conscious choice, and that can lead to these new sort of, as you said, emergent possibilities. And so I think with uni-duality and unividuality, for me, that experience of the one in relationship with itself, it makes it so that we're still separate and individual, but we're unified, so there's that sense of interconnection. And for me right now, and I'm curious if you agree, I would say that the bigger problem in the world right now is division. And is people, I would say, not thinking enough of themselves rather than thinking too much of themselves, or feeling disempowered and like we can't make change. And I think that unividuality allows us to kind of harness that interconnected oneness to realize that we can change our stories on the individual level, and that's going to change the story on the collective level. And it's healing that division. I think we need to heal the divide right now in the world. And I don't think you can do that with non-duality. And hence this new word, uni-duality and unividualism, I think is really at the heart of it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, one of the great things that's happened has been the individual. You go back in history, history is not full of modern individuals. It's full of quite different human beings. Yeah. The modern individual is modern. And the idea that everyone is an individual, and not just the pharaoh or whoever, but everyone, that's a lot, and that's new. And it's come with a price. Yeah. It's come with division, it's come with isolation, it's come with collapse of sometimes the collapse of community, all of those things which have happened alongside it. But but overwhelmingly, the change, say, in the role of men and women has been about individuality. Mm-hmm. I want my daughter to have the same opportunities as my son. Exactly. They're individuals. Yeah. I don't see them as a this or a that. They're not in this. They're not group members. Yeah, exactly. They're individuals, and the same with race and with everything, and all these things. So we've reached that level, and then it feels like, well, where does it go from there? After individualism, is that it? There you go. And we can be conscious of the individual, and see the negative side of that, which is, and feel like, oh, well, somehow we should go back to some sort of collectivism. Throw the baby out with the bathwater. Whereas actually what this offers, I think, is again that paradoxical thing of, no, become more individual. Think for yourself, find your own way, live your own life, but don't live it in isolation. Exactly. Now live it as part of the relation with the whole. With the community, with the whole, and then that ancient ethos of service comes right back. Exactly. It almost feels just that natural desire for altruism and benevolence, as you said, is really, I think, what's that most prominent feeling that comes up. Yeah, so for me, the thing with the benevolence was, I often, historically, and I have here, because it's like, that's the word I like, I've talked about love, and I think it was the big love, and metta, or agape. But the thing about that love is it's wonderful, and we've just been right in it at the retreat. Mm-hmm. Is that it doesn't stay always, or ever, actually, and it can be a bit overwhelming. and I'm a bit gooey, and it's like, don't ask me to do anything too practical or sharp. And so I was thinking that comes and goes, and it's a good thing it comes and goes. What's the thing which stays? Does anything stay? And I think it does. And I think as I've got older and inhabited these deep awake states more and more and more, what stays is this kind of universal benevolence. That's always there.
Right.
Even when I'm shouting at the TV screen because there's somebody saying something I disagree with, and I'm being a bit like, ugh.
Yeah.
I still wish them well.
Right, it's still good.
Anything
good
I could do, I would, and I want things to work for them. Or even where there's something I want to stop happening, I still wish that the whole process well.
Exactly.
And that, I think, is what arises from this oneness, this huge benevolence.
Yeah, and I think that it has a lot to do with taking action as well. Because if you feel, let's say, compassion or benevolence, but you've kind of denied your individuality or your agency, then you can't put that into action. There's no compassion in action. And so what I feel with this philosophy and the experience that it points to, of course, that's what we really want at the end of the day, is so optimistic.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that you've really given me. And I wonder if maybe we could say a little bit about that, about crafting more optimistic narratives that are spiritual optimism, if you will.
Yeah.
It's not delusional, like manifest $1 million raining from the sky tomorrow, but
I think what we're looking for is things which are. I love the etymology of words because it shows how they've evolved.
Me too.
The etymology of truth is trustworthy. So we're looking for ideas which we can trust. So trying to build hope on ideas you can't trust is not going to work because they're going to fall to bits.
Yeah.
But if you can find solid ideas that it turns out, you can trust those ideas, and then from that, take an optimistic picture. Well, this vision of the unfolding universe, the self-realizing universe, the evolving, the emergent universe, of which we are absolutely embedded, is, I want to say it's redeeming.
it is redeeming.
Because it goes, the future we create can redeem the suffering that led to it.
And that's the hero's journey, isn't it?
It is, and it turns around then the thing about suffering. You said really early on about non-duality as about escaping suffering. What was this? No self, no suffering.
No self, no
No
suffering.
self, no suffering. And then what this does is it goes, well, let me just, I'm going to end that sentence, but I'm going to put this in between, this little caveat, because it's how I got there, which is, look, the suffering, if you love, you will suffer.
Exactly.
That's what I want to say. It's like if you are a human being in relationship. When my little girl was born, and I literally just over there, and she came out of the birth pool and opened her eyes and looked into mine for the very first time, and I'm holding this little. Well, actually, my wife Debbie was holding her, and I was holding Debbie, and I just thought, oh, that's it, I'm in trouble. I'm in real trouble, because if anything happens to this little girl, I am going to suffer.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I could just see I had a choice.
You have a choice.
I could disconnect and not go, oh, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah.
Or I could dare to love.
Dare to love.
And I would open myself up to a lifetime of worry and suffering.
Exactly.
But worth it.
Worth
and in
it.
that moment, it was like, yeah, bring it on.
Unbelievable that you said that.
Just-
It's absolutely, I think, and some people won't like hearing me say this, but I kind of feel at a certain point it was like making a deal with the non-dual devil, where you can have everything you want, you can have all the freedom, you can have all the peace, you can have all the immunity from suffering, but you just have to get rid of everything that ever mattered to you.
Wow,
right?
that is such an image, Jessica.
It is, and it's very intense. I have sometimes these dark sort of metaphors,
but it's absolutely
because
right.
It was a very profound thing
Just
that I lost.
Just give me your soul. Oh God!
Literally,
Literally, give me your soul,
and you can have freedom,
and I will give you the freedom from all your human suffering.
Right, but first they'll tell you that those things don't really matter. So all you have to get rid of is what doesn't really matter.
But you will lose that,
and then you realize that is what matters. So, yeah.
So there's one idea which has been floating around that I feel like we should pick up on, although part of me wants to just end our conversation on the non-dual devil.
Oh no!
Just because it's kind of darkly...
Something optimistic.
It's darkly funny though.
It is.
Is all of this relies, a lot of it relies, or the individual. What's the great power of the individual? They're conscious and they have choice.
Yes.
And you said it earlier, is you can choose.
It's all
and of
about
course,
choice.
one of the great doctrines, and it was the one that Ramesh Balsekar introduced me to, which I really hadn't got before, was no one chooses. There is no doer, it's all just happening.
It's all happening.
And I entered a state very quickly after that where I just went, oh yeah, where I could see thoughts were arising and was just in the same way that the sun rises.
Right.
It's all just happening. And it was very interesting.
Sure.
And there's a kind of a flow state you can hit with it as well, which is very interesting. But what I want to say now to that is, so I'm not sure what they think is doing the choosing. It feels like, what does it even mean? It feels now to me, because what I became was this, again, this kind of idea that I was this thing called consciousness watching.
Right.
Totally passive.
The witness.
The witness. Yeah, the presence, just witnessing. And you can get that, but I think what that actually is a very, very emergent state of the system. Because the system has been backing off from itself the whole way. The system can go, oh look, I am sensing the world. Oh look, I'm thinking about sensing the world. Oh look, I'm thinking about sensing the world. Wow. And you can back off, and you're like, oh, I'm conscious of all of this is happening. And it is. You don't consciously choose your thoughts. You can't, because before you can choose them, you have to be conscious of them. So your thoughts are part of an unconscious system that you are.
Yeah.
And you're choosing all the time. I mean, my system is allowing me to do this crazy movement with my hands because I do it habitually. But so it's not a conscious choice, but it is a choice. And then sometimes I can take that ability to reflect, to process it with HD and go, oh, let's look at my thoughts. Oh, that's a rubbish thought. That's a really interesting one. Oh, that's a dangerous one. Oh, I don't know which about those two.
Right.
And then I can back off even further and I can go, what basis am I making these choices on? And that's philosophy. And these are very emergent states.
True.
But I'm choosing.
Right.
The system is choosing.
Exactly.
It takes us right back to the very early part of the conversation. We're going, what is the self that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Surely the self is the individuated system, which is one system in relationship to all the other systems.
Yeah.
And part of that system is it has developed the ability to choose between actions. And it's able to do that consciously on higher and higher levels.
Yeah, and that's a good thing.
It's a wonderful thing. It's given us the power to create.
Of course.
We can imagine, we can choose this, not that. It's given us morality, it's given conversation. It's given people who are listening to this the ability to go, I agree, I don't agree.
To choose to disidentify with the ego.
Yeah, all of it. That's all been because of that. It's the most powerful thing we have, and it's being denigrated. The thing is that at any time, most of it is unconscious, and that's a good thing.
Sure.
And if you're a sports person, for instance, it fascinates me. I'm thinking about music. You're a musician. I'm a musician. If you want to play a musical instrument, you have to do it consciously, don't you? You have to sit there and go, duh, duh. But then when you've got it, you don't sit there and think, put your fingers there.
Exactly.
You just do it.
You flow.
It's unconscious. And then you can watch. Wow. And you can play. Wow, listen to that.
Right.
And I don't even, well, I'm doing it now as I'm speaking.
Of course.
I just do it.
Yeah.
Why? Because I've thought about all these things a million times. So it can just flow.
It comes naturally.
But if you throw something at me now which I haven't thought about, I need to stop. And I need to slow down and I need to choose and reflect.
And you need that ability.
So all of it feels like that is what the self is doing. The self is the whole system. It's reflecting. The system can focus on the oneness. The system, and I don't mean that in a derogatory kind of making it all like the Matrix. I mean just as a way of describing a complex set of qualities, which are this.
Yeah.
Has the ability then to also witness itself.
Right.
And I discovered that through Ramesh Balsekar. What was wrong was the interpretation. Same with the samadhi states.
Right.
They're wonderful. What was wrong was the interpretation.
And you don't want to stay there forever. That's not, for me, that's no longer a destination point.
You can't stay there forever,
That's true.
You just
and I wouldn't want to.
You actually can't.
It's very true. But on your way to trying, you can really fuck yourself up.
Yeah.
I mean, this whole idea of, there's no free will, which is on one hand on sort of philosophy, but then you have it in spirituality where you said sort of, it's all just life is living you. Yeah. You are being breathed. Yeah, okay, that's true on one hand. But when you take it so far that you then sort of erode your sense of agency, you get all of these people that are suddenly like, who's driving the bus?
Yeah,
and
that's right.
That's me, and that's a lot of other people that I'm finding that really finding that their ability to to make these intentional choices has sort of...
Exactly. So I think there's two big things in there which are good to kind of lay down as we kind of pull all this together, which is a view which goes, look, because you get this, there will be a lot of people who go, look, science has said there's no free choice. That's good to, I mean, free choice is too big a subject to take on in detail. But no, but it's really interesting because what science does is it denies your free choice. Why? Because it also eradicates your humanity from the opposite direction. That's why science and non-duality kind of can do that quite easily.
They really do.
Because they're both reductionists.
They're both reductionists.
So they're going, you think you're choosing this, but really it's neurons. Neurons are really chemicals. Chemicals are really subatomic particles. There's a causality happening, and you have the illusion of choice. What emergentism says is, that's rubbish. That's what's happening on the lowest level, but the higher levels of emergence are just as real. They're organisation on a higher level, and they are affecting everything.
That so much.
It's a turnaround. It reduces that kind of Victorian reductionism and replaces it with a modern emergentism.
Right.
The same with spirituality. It goes, look, the self, what do you mean? The self is your individuated system, which is a psyche and a body right now, and that is choosing.
Right.
And you're not the conscious bit, you're all of it.
Exactly.
You're the whole thing.
It's all you.
And the conscious bit is the bit the system has got to navigate itself as well as the world in this high definition to really, and you need to look at yourself because otherwise you'll just repeat the same old way of processing.
Yeah.
But if you look at yourself, you can come to more emergent states and then you're in a new world.
Exactly. Yeah. I think that if I could say one more thing about reductionism, because this was such an aha moment for me that I learned from you was this, I didn't even really understand what reductionism meant. I came to a lot of this philosophy just trying to understand this experience. And I'm very familiar with sort of the non-dual communities kind of putting down science and philosophy and thinking that they're somehow, better than science or they don't need science. But I realized through you that they're making the exact same fundamental mistake of reductionism. So what I understand now is that science is reducing the spirit to the material, and this type of non-duality was reducing the material to the spiritual. So they're making the same exact mistake at the end of the day. They're in bed together.
Yeah, and once you get this, the Uni-dual, it's like, well, it's all real.
Exactly.
And it's
you don't need to reduce anything.
Yeah, you don't. And then suddenly you're living the life you were already living, but it's full of meaning, and that's the optimism.
Yeah, that's the optimism.
And as you can, the hope that I try and offer people is a deeper way of understanding the thing that's already happening to them.
Right.
And the chance to experience these more emergent states, which don't have to be about negating all of that. They can actually enhance it. Exactly. And you come into your individuality is more.
Right.
You become a better you. I'm a better Tim for those experiences of love
because
and
you're more than Tim.
Yeah, and it's redeeming. It's saving.
It is
to enter into that.
And that's why we need uni-duality.
Yeah, I think that's right. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, that's been fun.